Hi, my name's Luke, and these are my 5 tips on how to improve your wheelies. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a while now, and I finally feel confident enough to make it for you guys. So in the unlikely event that you've seen one of my past videos, you'll know that last year I finally learned how to wheelie. Now that I've finally mastered this skill, I thought I'd share some tips and tricks that I discovered when learning to wheelie. And hopefully this gives you a beginner's perspective on how to wheelie a mountain bike. I really hope this gives you some new tips that you may have not learned before, as I realized from experience that a lot of videos on YouTube seem to say the same thing. So tip number 1 is don't let your front wheel get too high at the start of your wheelie. And by this I mean when you do your initial pedal stroke, don't do it too hard so that your front wheel comes up really high. The reason for this is if you bring your front wheel up too high at the start, you instantly have to press the brake, which will do one of two things. Either your front wheel will come crashing back down and you'll end your wheelie, or you'll slow down and you'll be going so slowly that you end up losing balance. So one thing to note about a wheelie is that speed is key. So what you want to do is, with your first pedal stroke, get your front wheel so it's just below the balance point. And then when you move on to your second pedal stroke, you can gently ease the front wheel into the balance point, which will make sure you're up to speed by the time you're wheeling and make it much easier to balance. So tip number 2 is to lean back with confidence and having the correct posture on the bike. I know this sounds simple, but it made a massive difference to me. When you start out wheeling as a beginner, the greatest fear is always falling backwards. And as a result, it's hard to fully commit to the wheelie. Looking back at some old clips from when I was learning to wheelie, you can see that whilst I'm leaning back, my head and shoulders are kind of hunched forward, which means I have little control over the bike. This means that once the front wheel is starting to go down, it's very hard to bring it back up again. If you compare that to now, my back is much more straight and my shoulders and head are clearly leaning back into the wheelie. And this makes it much more easy to bring the front wheel back up when it goes down, and also helps with the balance side to side. It also means that your head is looking straight forward, which really helps with balance. So tip number 3 is to hold your back brake near the bite point. If you're like me, your brakes probably need a bleed, and that means that when you pull in your brake lever, you probably don't get instant bite of the brakes. Now this means that when you're trying to modulate your brakes during a wheelie, which is just gently kind of touching the brakes to bring the front wheel down, you'll probably find that it's very hard to do because it's hard to judge where that bite point is in your brakes. So a solution I found to this is to squeeze your brakes in until they're just near the bite point. And this way, when you come to have to brake, you can just gently squeeze and it's much easier to modulate the brakes instead of having to kind of guess where that bite point is. So tip number 4 is learning how to control your speed. Now this is a major factor in being able to wheelie for long distances or for long periods of time. Without being able to control your speed, you'll either find you go too fast and your legs spin around so quickly that you can't bring the front wheel up anymore, or you just get too scared because you're going so fast. And if you're going too slow, it's really hard to balance side to side and you'll probably find you lose your balance quite quickly. Now the key to controlling your speed is positioning your front wheel either above or below the balance point. If you're going too fast, lean back really far and make sure your front wheel is above the balance point. At this point you can then drag your brake while keeping that front wheel above the balance point, and this will work to slow your bike down. If you however feel you're going too slow, try and drop the front wheel slightly below the balance point. This will allow you to then pedal and bring your bike up to speed without having to press the back brake, which will slow you down. These are skills you should really try to master because if you want to wheelie long distances, you really have to be able to control your speed. Now my final tip is to keep an even pedal stroke. A wheelie is much easier to control if your pedal stroke is constant. If you're constantly stopping and starting with pedaling, your body is likely to be much less stable. Ideally, you want to get to a point where you can pedal constantly and keep the bike perfectly in the balance point, where you hardly have to use any back brake at all. And this means that your bike will keep moving in that balance point and you'll be very stable. What are you doing? So yeah, if you have a constant pedal stroke, you're way more likely to have a much more balanced wheelie, and this will help you in the long term to just not be too tense and allow you to relax into the wheelie and go for a long time. Now finally, whilst this is not a physical tip, it's something I'd still like to cover, and that is your mindset. Your mindset is a very important part of learning a new skill, but is often overlooked, I think. Learning to wheelie at times can be extremely frustrating, as I have discovered. Some days will be really good and you'll feel like you're making loads of progress, whilst other days you'll feel like you've made negative progress and you're going backwards. This is something you just have to accept, that some days are going to feel really good and other days are going to feel really bad. To try and combat this, when I was learning to wheelie, I set myself aside 20 minutes and in that time, I'd just go and practice my wheelies. This meant that whether I was doing really well or doing really bad, I'd still keep the same amount of time I was practicing for. So then if I got particularly frustrated, I wouldn't just keep going and learning bad habits by practicing while my whole body was tired. Also, when you're doing a wheelie, your mindset is really important. If you were to wheelie and think negatively about your front wheel coming down, your front wheel is then much more likely to come down. So I encourage you therefore to, when you're wheeling, think positively, not about when your front wheel is going to come down or if your wheelie is going to be too short, but try and think about how far you can go and think positively about it. So those were my 5 tips on how to wheelie, plus a little bonus one at the end. I really hope these tips help you learn to wheelie, as these were the things I found most important when I was learning. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them below. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing or clicking that like button. Anyway, that's it for now, and have fun learning to wheelie. See ya.